All right, welcome everybody to another episode of Tennis Channel Inside In, the podcast that covers the game you know and love with expert analysis from players, coaches, broadcasters, journalists, and people involved in the sport. I'm your host, Mitch Michals, from the Santa Monica studio, reminding you that you can find this podcast on every one of your podcast platforms by just searching Tennis Channel Inside In. And today, with days to start the main draw at Roland Garros, I'm joined by a very special guest. It's been a year since we've had him back on the show. He was the prominent voice, the workhorse, if you will, for the New York Times for over 30 years, covering tennis. He's written critically acclaimed books, columns, including The Master on Roger Federer. And now you can find him on his Substack page, as well as all the grounds for pretty much all the big events of the tournaments going on. Journalist Chris Clarey joins the show. Chris, long time coming, totally on my end, but I'm delighted to have you back on the show and excited to talk some tennis with you.
Mitch, thanks for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and you know your stuff, so I better have my stuff ready, huh?
Well, that's a very big compliment coming from you. And before we get into the mix, I just wanted to ask you kind of how things were going. I mentioned you were the standard in a lot of ways for journalism for tennis in this country, covering it for the New York Times, but in a bit of a different role, which always can be exciting and challenging for you, covering the game independently, but also staying very busy with your books and your pieces and day-to-day tennis news. How has that transition been for you now that you've had some time to settle into that role?
Yeah, it's been good for my tennis game, I'll tell you that. I'm back to a very modest 4-5, but it's a lot better than I was a couple of years ago, so that's nice. No, it was my call to leave. It was really, in many ways, driven by the success of my book on Federer, the Master, that did really well globally and in the U.S., North America, and so that really gave me this opportunity. And I was ready for something new. And I had no idea at the time that I left, Mitch, that the New York Times would basically fold its sports department, not fire anybody, but basically shut it down and go with The Athletic as their main thing. That was certainly a surprise to me. That happened about a month and a half after I left, so a lot of sympathy from my former colleagues in terms of the tumult there. But for me, it's been a very good year. More focus on personal things, and also writing long form is a very different muscle and a very different sort of way of doing things than daily journalism and the pressure of covering the news. And I'm less interested really in covering news anymore now with Substack that you mentioned, Tennis and Beyond, and I'm more interested in kind of going in depth on different topics, really doing a good job analyzing matches that come along, big matches, big finals, big things like that, which I think in today's sort of social media driven landscape, you get less of that now. You get less of what I used to call the classic game story, where somebody really plunges into a match and gives you a really good read about that match. It's all pretty, quick. And then when it's over, you move on to the next thing. And I thought it'd be fun to use, the blog to do some more of those sort of classic game stories. And people seem to be responding well to it. So I'm not doing anywhere near the same kind of rhythm I did before, Mitch, but I'm still doing regular coverage of the game.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how you see the landscape of tennis coverage changing, and you took some of the words out of my mouth there in terms of, I think a lot of it's cyclical, like it moved on from game stories, and then we found out that people missed that. So then suddenly there's the void because of how quick everything is in terms of just making pointed analysis. That some of that work is kind of desired. Do you feel like coverage of the sport has changed a little bit in the last couple of years, especially?
Oh, that's a big topic. I mean, it has changed immeasurably in the last 10, 15 years. And the last couple of years, I think it's just, we'll see what happens in our country. Obviously, with The Athletic and my former colleague, Matt Futterman, moving over from the Times to kind of lead that tennis department there. I know they're going to do a good job with that, and they already are, and it'll be in depth in a different way. You've still got, the Brits are covering the game, but you're not seeing, in my view, those really in-depth sort of takes on the matches. A lot of quick hits. Not everybody, but mostly quick hits. And the feeling kind of is, once you're done with the match and it's been covered on social media with people chiming in all along, you're kind of done and you're moving on to the next match. But I still think it's fun. This is not all that I want to do, but I'm saying I think it's a kind of a hole that's been created by journalism itself, and that sort of cycle of, let's keep things going forward. Let's always look ahead. So it's, in my view, it sort of changed from prologue, game story, epilogue, advance, to prologue, social media frenzy, and then advance. There wasn't a whole lot of we talked about what was going to happen, but actually what happened, we didn't get into it enough, in my view, from what I was used to. So I'm kind of
Yeah.
enjoying using the blog for that, and
Yeah.
not for every match, obviously, or every final, but for the big stuff. And I want to definitely do that with the majors and try to plunge into, whatever historical thing comes along and that sort of stuff. But I think the coverage of the game needs to kind of have a little more balance in those three compartments again, if you ask me.
Right, I would agree with that. And I think someone from your perch and considerable experience, I think one of the benefits of that is, in this era where and there's a lot of excited tennis fans, new and old, but we look at something happening, maybe something that's groundbreaking or dominant play, and we think, wow, this is crazy. This is the best thing that's ever happened. We've never seen anything like this. It could be bad too, but someone in your experience can go back into the history book and say, well, there are examples of this. We can kind of use points of references. Every story is the same, but it's good to have that historical perspective to compare and also contrast in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's a good point. And as long as my memory holds out, that's the problem. You
Yeah.
remember Bud Collins, of course, the great Bud Collins, who was deservedly a legend in the media side of the business because he did everything. He was print, he did radio, he did television, he could do it all. And he had a prodigious memory for tennis things. And so you could ask Bud about stuff that happened 35, 40 years ago. Once in a while, I wondered whether he really remembered or not, but he would have it. So my goal is to kind of get halfway to where Bud was as I hit my dotage here. But I think that really is nice to bring in, especially in a sport like tennis that has so much rich history
Mhm.
and has so many commonalities. I mean, they've been playing at Wimbledon for 150 years. They've been playing at the U.S. Open for a century. So I mean, all these
Yeah.
different things you can really tie back in a wonderful way, like golf as well with the majors. And I think it's wonderful to be able to do that. My personal memory bank goes back to the early 70s as a fan and spectator, and as a journalist, I go to the late 80s. So starting to get a little long in the tooth, so it can be useful to go back and look at like Iga Swiatek and think about
Right.
Steffi Graf, who in some ways she reminds me of in terms of her energy on the court and the way she moves around the court and the athleticism. So it's just all those things you can tie in because you've seen them before. I think it is good.
Well, the tennis calendar now that carousel stops going into Roland Garros. We just completed Rome, and I wasn't really planning on discussing this, but I do think it's kind of funny and interesting, right? We've seen this before. It can be cyclical in a lot of ways, Chris, but the fact that the roles in recent history have flipped. Now you have a women's game that looks like it might be more on the predictable side going into Roland Garros, and the men's side has this intrigue and drama and possibilities. I just thought that was funny from recent memory.
It is a bit, but I think that's the great strength of tennis, Mitch, isn't it? And I think people, have always recognized that to some degree, but I hope they really recognize it because ultimately, I'm not saying either one's bad. Stability, Iga as the dominant force on clays, who's going to knock her off like Rafa before in the men's side, and then the men being basically chaos at this moment because of everything that's going on. Both are fun in different
Yeah.
ways, but what's nice is that you kind of have one of each at the same time. I think having two just super established champions at the same time that's less interesting to me than having that double scenario where you get an option to have what the heck's going to happen and this is probably going to happen. And I think that's one of the great beauties of covering tennis and following tennis is that the women and the men kind of they kind of cover for each other in ways. And I don't want to see every tournament become a dual event. I think it's good to have some standalone events for the women, standalone events for the men. But I like that trend in general because they really do lift each other up, especially, if you're going to go to everything at 10, 12, 14, 15-day events, you're going to need all those storylines to carry you.
Yeah, I agree. Variety is good. Having balance, having some level of uncertainty. Although on the women's side, doesn't seem to be much uncertainty now. Iga Swiatek rolls in the rematch over Aryna Sabalenka. The Madrid match was close. The Rome match was not. Just 5 games lost. Iga is very process oriented, Chris. We know how good she is on the clay. We also understand that the gap is widening in a lot of ways. That was a clear warning shot to the field. And she's admitted, I haven't won anything yet, but you watch her play, you watch her beat the clear number 2 play in the world and beat her cleanly and easily. It does make you think what it would take to beat Iga Swiatek on clay in any tournament, let alone Roland Garros.
Yeah, I mean, I think Aryna Sabalenka, to me, obviously Madrid, the conditions there are a little quicker. Aryna was a little fresher. But she didn't play as well to me. I think she wanted revenge a bit too much, seemed a bit tight, missed some critical shots early. And then she had the 7 break points at the beginning of the second set in Rome. She converts any one of those, then it gets a little tighter and maybe Iga's not swinging quite as cleanly and as freely, and then it maybe gets to be more interesting. But I don't think she was really close to the level that she showed in Madrid down the stretch. I think she has better in her. I think she could play a better match on clay against Swiatek. But Iga is just such a relentless competitor, and I think is returning so well. And I think her serve, you look at the numbers, really dig into them. It's not necessarily better than last year, but I do feel like she's getting some big point pop. And I think I don't like the serve, aesthetically as much as before. It's a little bit abbreviated and a little rough around the edges, but I think it's given her a little more pop when she needs it. And I think she's going to get, win a few more first serve points when she gets the first serve in play. So you're going to have to return really well against Iga. And I think that third shot when you're serving is so key because she's going to come after you and apply the pressure. And you've got to get some depth off your third shot to be able to push her off.
Yeah, it's scary to think that her serve can get better. Like there's still room to grow for Iga's game. Like this is where we're at and it could still get better. The numbers speak for themselves at this point. She's having statistically by winning percentage her best year. She also has the most ranking points at 11,695 of any woman since Serena in 2015. I bring that up to say we always are looking for drama and storylines. No player is unbeatable, but do you see Sabalenka as the most credible threat, or could someone, I know Coco Gauff got there, Rybakina, who wasn't able to play Rome, or Danielle Collins or other names, do you think it's going to take somebody outside of Sabalenka to give her a chase, or are we just looking at another third edition of this matchup?
Well, I think it depends how Rybakina looks health-wise coming into the tournament. I mean, she's had ups and downs with her health. She's pulled out of couple of events. I know it must have hurt her to pull out of her defending her title in Rome. I mean, she obviously has a game that bothers Iga. I mean, she beat her on indoor clay, not the same, obviously, but she beat her on indoor clay in Stuttgart not long ago, which looks pretty good right now, looking at what's happened since then. And she's 4-2 against her in her career. Definitely can handle the topspin and the pace. Obviously not as athletic a mover, I don't think, as Sabalenka, but certainly a more stable big match presence in a lot of ways with the Sabalenka. You don't know what you're going to get necessarily. And I think Rybakina's serve is a more reliable weapon, even though Sabalenka has certainly shored that up. So, on clay, right conditions, maybe a sunny day where the ball's moving, I think you got to give her a shot against Iga anywhere. And there are players who could trouble her. Coco didn't play badly in Rome. I think obviously the double faults to lose those two early service games in the first set didn't help. A lot of ghosts there. Missed a couple of key shots here and there. So she wasn't far off. But I just do feel like a lot of her strengths play right into Iga's strengths, and that, what's it, right. 10-1 now with all 10 of those being straight set victories. I mean, that the numbers don't lie. So I got to like Iga in any match against Coco anywhere right now at this stage of their careers. Doesn't mean it can't change.
Right. The Coco thing is a good point. I wanted to get into that because it's a interesting dilemma, right? I think she's getting better. I think she's narrowing the gap in a lot of ways with what her best tennis could be, that, thing that they're always chasing. But Iga does match up with her so well. And it's a lot of, like you've seen this before, when you're the second or third best going against an all-time great, whether it's a surface or in general, that number, the head-to-head number can skew. We saw that with Federer versus Nadal on clay all those years when he was clearly the number two player and just could not get past there. I think Coco, like you said, played very well. His game is always rabid. She's like that little sister, little brother that's always ready for the next matchup. But Iga just weathered the storm. And she's like inevitable, is the way I would put it, Chris, on clay. Eventually, she's going to settle in, wear you down, take that little opening, and just sprint to the finish line.
There was a section in that match, I don't remember exactly when it was. I think it was second set. And Coco, who's, I think, a terrific role model in many ways and wonderfully expressive, articulate, upbeat person. But she was talking to the chair umpire at length about Iga taking a swig of water when she went over to her changeover, when just kind of brush off the clay after she stumbled a little bit. It just showed at what point I think Coco's just trying to get either Iga out of her head or how far Iga is into her head, that she would focus on something like that at that point in the match when it really should have been all about what was happening inside the lines. Why get yourself distracted there? So there's definitely a big mental edge, despite the Cincinnati result last year and the great U.S. Open run that Coco had. I think Iga has a big mental edge on her, and that's the one player when Coco sees her, she just doesn't feel confident deep down. You could see it on those few big points in Rome, and I just wonder, how she solves that. I think she's going to have to get to a point where she uses her speed and her variety, and I think Coco can play touch game as well. You've seen her use the drop shot. You've seen her. She's got a wonderful net game. All those things could come into play, but deep down, I don't think she really believes that she's the better player right now, and she needs to change that equation somehow. And Iga's got a great, Mitch, got a great career plan. I saw it 2 or 3 years ago when I spent some time with her. Very systematic, very Federer Nadal-like approach to her game and her career, every aspect of it. After having some periods in her early career when she was really kind of out of control, didn't feel that mastery, she's really tried to address everything very systematically, mental, physical, preparation, everything side. And it's a kind of platform for constant improvement that the big three gave us. And I think it wouldn't be surprising to see her go that way. A lot of things can happen in this crazy world we're living in, but she has the right approach, I think, for long-term excellence.
She just handles success so well. And that's such an underrated, undervalued in a lot of ways characteristic, is that you win a couple tournaments, a couple majors. She's still the same person. And 100% agreement. That is what the big three taught us. It's not about resting on one victory, as great as that could be. Well, Chris, before we move on to some of the men's storylines and get into the Rome action there, I wanted your perspective when we were setting up this chat on Danielle Collins and this year, this last dance that is beholden to some of the best, literally the best tennis she's ever played. Runs into Sabalenka, no shame in losing to, as we said, the clear number 2 player in the world. But did this come from any place that you thought that it would be possible there, where Collins is literally playing the best tennis of her career in the final year she's playing on tour?
Well, there's been cases of both over the years in tennis history, I think, where people have taken that, kind of gotten rid of that burden. This is what I'm going to do. Yeah, I think it's backfired more than it's helped. Like, I'll never forget Stefan Edberg, who's one of my favorite players to cover and to follow just in general because of his game and all that. And he announced his final season. I think he was 30 years old. And the whole thing just turned into this really tough procession of downbeat performances. And every time he was there, he'd get some kind of plate or award or some kind of moment to thank you, Stefan. And it was just painful for him and for everybody else. So he always recommends to everybody never do that. Danielle's kind of done that. And maybe because of the type of personality that she is and the pressure that she may put on herself. I'm very hesitant to speculate too much because Danielle's, I think, a very complex person, and I don't think really appreciates when people speculate about her too much, to be honest, as you can see. I think you're better off trying to get it straight from Danielle. I can't help but be a little skeptical that she's having this wonderful season. Is she really, if she goes and wins the U.S. Open and has this great sort of top 3 year, is she really going to want to shut it down, with the Australian Open coming up? And I believe her. But part of me is journalistically and historically just a little skeptical. There's so many comebacks in tennis that you spend a year off and come back, and anything's possible. But let's just take it at face value. I think it is definitely helping her kind of let go a little bit and just realize that this is her chance to swing freely. And my goodness, she'd return, especially second serves, so well when she's timing it well. And she's a ferocious competitor, and she's letting it all go. But I don't know about you, but 2 years ago when she reached the final of the Aussie Open, I thought that she was going to become a fixture in the top 10. I mean, she really had great composure, is at a good stage of her career. I didn't see a whole lot of holes in her game. Good serve, good returns, good groundies, moves pretty well, competes great. So been a series of injuries and illnesses and other things we may not know about that have not allowed that to happen. But I think she's playing at her real level now. And there are limitations, not always the best plan Bs, but her plan A is definitely top 5, definitely top 10.
There was always a fearlessness with her. You can see it on the court. And I do think this is the perfect blend of the burden being gone and having that tenacity, having that approach where she doesn't fear the opponent on the other side of the net, even if they're the best player in the world. So I agree. It's a complex thing, and I'm not going to speculate and say this is officially it or officially not. I don't think she'd like that, but it's been remarkable to see, and it's another storyline in tennis. More here with Chris Clarey on Tennis Channel Inside In, talking all the action on the tennis tours. The tours get ready for Roland Garros, putting Rome in the rear view. On the men's side, it was Alexander Zverev winning the Italian Open, Chris. But before we get to that, I was just going through, and we're so used to Nadal cleaning up and Djokovic this time of year. But the 4 tournaments, the 3 Masters plus Barcelona, just the winners. And I want to read them off here. Tsitsipas, Ruud winning Barcelona, Rublev in Madrid, now Zverev in Rome. Not what you would expect. And I'd also have to say 4 different winners this time of year feels a little strange on the men's side.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, I guess I haven't gone back and crunched the numbers. Maybe you have. Last time, I'm thinking might have been, what, maybe '04?
That's yeah, because I was going to say off the top of my head, I haven't crunched the numbers, but Nadal is usually a lock for two of these. And,
Yeah. Look, I
and
know
we, we-
Nadal won Monte Carlo in '05. That was the year it all began, right? So
yeah,
'04 was the Gaudio Coria final.
yeah,
Um, I just think that probably was the last time. But Coria was having a
right.
pretty dominant season then, so it might have to go back farther than that. But I personally, you know, if I'm being 100% honest, I kind of like it because it opens up a little crack for Rafa,
Mm,
who's a true underdog. Rafa hasn't been an underdog anywhere on clay in his whole life, probably. But I think in a way, I'm not saying he's going to win, but I'd like to see him have a good run, for what he's put into this comeback, for what he's given to the game, for what he's given to Roland Garros. You don't want to see him go out in the first round, end up getting the draw and getting Novak in the first round, or Zverev for somebody who's not ready to play. But with all this uncertainty and nobody really dominating, there's room for I think a good solid Rafa run and best of five if he puts it together, which I think would be great. But overall, I'm ready for this. I don't know about you. I feel like we've had a status quo dominant one, two, three guys. Now we got a pretty open
yeah,
field, and I think the novelty of it's great. Let's see what happens. But it could be a very surprising victor. Somebody could really emerge and pop
yeah.
up. Not even the guys who won the titles in the clay court run up.
Yeah, haven't said Djokovic, Sinner, Alcaraz, the top three. They didn't win any of these events. A lot of them didn't play, most of them. But, Zverev winning in Rome, I want to get back to that because he's always been viewed as a contender here. I think he was lurking. We were looking at, how the odds makers had it, thinking, okay, it's a little low. If he has a big result, if he can get a title, which he did in Rome, he looked very good. On clay, this has been a player, Chris, that has always had the weapons and has been able to beat some of the best players even in majors. This was a very vital victory for him, and I think he's firmly in the mix as contenders, and you saw in Rome what he can do on this surface specifically.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, honestly, if I had to pick one person at this point, based on not just because of recency bias, I think the overall package is lifted. I'm surprised he hasn't won more this season, to be honest with you, considering the way he played against Carlos Alcaraz in Australia. I thought that was going to set the bar
Mhm.
pretty high for a lot of titles this year. But I think he's ready. But you've also got the situation with all the off court stuff and how that possibly might affect things. That it's a really an interesting dynamic. I mean, to be honest, half of or more than half of people that I speak to about it, don't want him to win.
Yeah.
They think, and I don't want to. No way should you convict anybody without a fair process or fair hearing. But there's just that sense that there's a lot of smoke around him, and there has to be fire, and hopefully he can resolve all this and satisfy all the questions. But he would be I think there'd be a lot of ambivalence about him winning, and maybe that energy gets picked up by Alex. I don't know, but just in terms of the pure tennis and what you see, the forehand quality I think is very high now. Clay gives him a little more time to organize it. It's a deadly shot as well. The backhand's always been great. He moves well for his size. I think he's got the confidence back after the big ankle injury. I'm sure he views Roland Garros as a hugely symbolic place after what happened against Rafa in that match at Roland Garros, the injury. So if I had to pick one guy, not by much, I would probably go with him to be the slight favorite.
And that match in Rome over Nico Jari, who, to be honest, is a player that has been gaining steam. He's almost like the tennis nerds, like secret weapon. Like we've always kind of known about this guy. It's nice to see a player from a country in Chile that's not, hasn't had the recent success, but he has a lot of weapons. He, has incredible touch at the net, Chris, and a nice little run, beating Tommy Paul in that semifinal, getting to his first Masters final. I love seeing the raw emotion, win or lose afterwards, because you can tell with players like this who have never been there before and ultimately might not ever get back there. It's good to see what it means and what this sport truly takes to get to that point.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Nico with the doping suspension and getting that setback earlier in his career, a lot to overcome. He seems like a stand-up guy who's done great work on his tennis. That serve and that forehand are major, major weapons. And I think the net game, as you said, if he can get his big body in place, people, when they watch him, they always go, what? He's 6'6" or 6'7"? People just don't realize because he looks so balanced in terms of how his body looks on television. When you see him live, you realize how tall he is, or when he comes to net to shake Alcaraz or somebody's hand. But he is a big package, and I'm not sure he moves quite well enough to be a Roland Garros best of 5 contender, to go super deep. But he's not somebody I'd want to play anytime, anywhere, really, the way he's playing right now and striking the ball. And that Tommy Paul Jerry match was great to see. They used the whole canvas. Good stuff.
It really was. Tommy Paul being back in the mix is great, not just for tennis in this country, but he is a very, very exciting tennis player. So that was a fun match. I guess we can transition now into Novak Djokovic, who we haven't said yet. It's funny, the defending champion does not have a title this year. Very, very late in the game for us to be saying that, but he took that wild card into Geneva at the time of recording. We're not, we'll not speculate on how far he's gone or will go, but Chris, playing an event the week before any major, let alone Geneva on clay before you defend the title, I think it kind of shows you that some of these, issues in terms of match toughness, reps, weren't imagined. This is somebody that's looking to get back on the court and get some matches in. How do you assess Novak's level and the potential for another great title run?
Well, I think if you had a couple of guys who had separated themselves truly, you had a Nadal in form, or you had a Alcaraz healthy and playing his best tennis, or Sinner not having doubts about his hip, I think you would have a hard time seeing Novak putting it all together and finding a way. But honestly, I can't say he won't do it. He hasn't shown signs this year of really having the grinta that he needs to pull it off, or the precision under pressure. And there've been some tough losses. He hasn't even been to a final this year. Not just not winning a title, and he hasn't played much. But greatness, and that, as Paul Annacone says, sort of that muscle memory on greatness, it doesn't go away. If he's physically okay, and he gets some matches in Geneva, winning or losing, how far he goes, best of 5 with the right draw, works his way in. He knows how to do it, and nobody's soaring high above the clouds looking down at the rest of the mortals right now. They're all mortals.
That landscape depiction is great because, yes, there is an opening. And when there's an opening, the players that have done it before, that have that championship DNA, it's very special. And I'm never going to count that guy out. But the flip side of that, Chris, is the sports almanac, the sports history books are filled with players that lost it. And we kept thinking, okay, well, they still have something left in the tank. And sometimes they don't. So we're at a critical juncture in his career. And he's already done so much to extend what we thought was possible with a career longevity. But even the best will get old and will slow down. And maybe that is that time, unfortunately.
It is an interesting thing because he's obviously, you can look at it a couple different ways. I mean, he's obviously changed his team around, moving on from his agents, his coach, Goran, his fitness trainer. He's made a lot of moves. Why would you do that if you weren't still in some way motivated to make some change? Otherwise, you just play out the string. I think he's trying to kind of jumpstart himself. He's trying to electroshock himself. There may be more stories behind the scenes there, but I think there's still motivation. I think maybe he's just finding himself running a little bit in the sand right now, not being able to figure out exactly how to get the magic back. I have seen flashes. There have been some good matches this year, but there also have been some points where it's like the rhythm's just not there. He seems to be struggling physically. He's always had moments in matches where he's looked like he's at the end of his rope, and then he finds more rope. But I think in what we've seen this year, it's been a bit recurring. He's been having energy issues in matches and big dips. Best of 5 does give you time to recover. And again, if there were guys that were just rocking the house, high above the clouds, I would feel differently. But I just can't. I think it's so unsettled. There is room for him to find his way. And it won't be easy. He's not going to win it like, okay, Novak sweeps through the field. But you could see him digging himself through, getting, through some 5-set matches, 4-set matches. The crowd is likely going to be behind him and Rafa a little bit more because of the fact that they've struggled this time. But, says he should be somebody we should be thinking his career is ending? No, I don't believe that. But, if he goes through the whole season and things don't go his way, it's not unthinkable that we could see Nadal, Murray, and Djokovic all by the end of 2024 moving on from tennis. It's not unthinkable at all.
Wow. Yeah, I know it's not. I'm just thinking about it right now. And that thought is...
and Stan, too. I can't imagine Stan's going to want to play another season if it goes like this season. So
yeah, hasn't been good for Stan. It was interesting to hear Djokovic say that based on history, you got to put Rafa up there near the top based on what he's done, which, 112-3 in the tournament is one thing. And as someone that's written the book, the warrior Rafael Nadal and his kingdom of clay, looking at Nadal going into this, you mentioned you like him for the opportunity. Spoken ad nauseum, the draw situation is going to be it's the most hyped, most watched draw situation probably in tennis history. But for Nadal to make a run to get back to winning here, Chris, at Roland Garros, at the place that he's dominated, what do you see him having to do? What do you see needing to go his way for Nadal to recapture some of that magic?
Well, I mean, you could argue that if he draws Djokovic in the first round, and by the time I think this is coming out on the day of the draw, so people will probably already know if they're watching our discussion. But if you were to draw Djokovic in Djokovic's current form in the first round, is that a horrible draw? It would be a horrible draw if Novak's in great form, but I mean, not necessarily if he isn't. So, I don't have a clear. I wish I had a clearer vision of what the ideal path is for him. I'm tempted to say, okay, qualifier, inexperienced player early, kind of get his chops in, get some confidence. Because what Rafa really needs is the timing. He's obviously lost a step. I mean, it's obvious when you watch him. You see the drop shots working against him in ways they never used to work. You see him in extension struggling a bit more. And yet, there were still moments in Barcelona and in Madrid where I saw him on wide forehands when he got there and did a lot of damage. So he still has the stuff in him to excel in places where you have to excel to succeed at Roland Garros. I just don't know if he has the rinse and repeat ability to do it as much as he used to. And we're drop shotting him a lot in his tournaments when he played, which you didn't see before. And that's definitely the word is going to get around on that. So he'll be vulnerable. But I think if he gets a round or two against guys who are going to he can handle with his clay court expertise and then works his way up, that would be ideal. But also, would you want to play him in the first round if you're a struggling
No.
top seed? I wouldn't.
Do you want to
get and that Chatrier atmosphere and the whole thing? And so basically, if Rafa's okay physically, he's going to be running on adrenaline. And I think he's had enough matches where he's going to have been able to solve in his way. What's his term he loves so much? Going to solve the problems that I will encounter, and I will want to experience the fight. So I think, is he going to win? I will say no. But could he get a deep run? I think it's possible.
Crowd's going to help him. We know that. And it just shows you that it doesn't take much, right? There's no huge glaring like this fell off. It's a couple percentage points dipping in your game, losing a step physically. It's so weird for me to be thinking that my big doubt is how he responds physically to best of five and the tennis, because that was his calling card. There was no athlete on tour like him. And yet that's my biggest concern, Chris, is just best of five, all these matches going back on court. If he has a long match, because that's kind of what ended up happening to him at Madrid, was you play the long match, then go again. So it's going to be fascinating.
No, it's true, but the thing is funny. It's interesting. I'm going to quiz you here live. Okay. So Rafa has played only 3 5-set matches, full 5 sets, which is incredible at Roland Garros.
Wait,
only
at Roland Garros.
Only 3.
Okay, so
he's king of 5 sets. You're right, but he's hardly ever gone 5. So who are the 3 guys he played over 5?
All right, I know Isner's on that list.
Isner is.
I didn't know that one. Now I'm gonna speak to just struggling a little more. I don't think any of those Djokovic matches won 5 sets.
Yep, Djokovic won
one of them.
Yep, yeah, the touch the net match.
That's right. Okay, and then you're gonna have to tell me. I won't cut this out. I'll admit defeat. Who was the third one?
Think Northern Neighbor.
Oh yeah, Felix. That's right.
Yep.
Felix.
Felix. But honestly, that's a great trivia thing. It'll be an amazing trivia thing unless he goes a bunch of 5-setters this year down the road. But think about that. All those years of Roland Garros, 18 years of Roland Garros, only 3 times has the guy been pushed to 5 sets. So it's, yes, he's been the king of that format, but he hasn't had to use the full benefit of the format very often.
Yeah, that's a good point. And just the final note on Nadal, I wanted to bring this up as we're nearing the end of his career. Right, Chris? There's probably no better teenage player than Nadal. Like what he did as an 18, 19-year-old, the amount of titles he won, just the tear. I mean, I know you're probably the guy to ask, but I remember his early entrance on the tour was just such a force, and he just won at such an amazing clip as a teenager.
Yeah, he did. He established himself early. I mean, Borg, I don't know how well the numbers in front of me. Borg had an awfully strong teenage period as well, for sure. Boris, obviously, big wins as a teenager as well, but not that consistent week to week thing. And also, what Rafa took out Roger in their very first match in Miami as a teenager, and that incredible worth a rewatch for people. And then the success all the way through, and then I think he would be on the men's side. Obviously, the women have had people who've been more dominant. He didn't hit
Right.
number one as a teenager. I don't know when Borg first got there. I have to go back and look. But Borg, I think, would be the closest equivalent in recent times for sure. But I wanted to say, Mitch, real quickly, the book is not ready to be published yet. We decided to wait because of Rafa's situation and the fact that he was going to play this season, it appeared. And so we decided to delay to give it as complete a run as we could. So I'm still working on it, but it will come out. Looks like maybe next year, for most likely, but we'll see how this all plays out the next couple of months with Roland Garros and the Olympics and what happens for Rafa this year.
Could be a crazy, insane final chapter in there.
Yeah, it could be.
We'll see. Well, before we wrap this up with a couple other, quick hitting topics, I did want to just ask you, if we haven't even gotten to Alcaraz and Sinner is on track to play. Alcaraz, is going to be there. Alcaraz, the betting favorite. A lot of people are expecting him to do well. I just want to lump kind of everyone in together with Djokovic and the guys we were talking about and ask you this. If everyone's at their best, hypothetically, which we know that's probably not the case, but who would you take if you're getting the best version of all these players?
Well, assuming you couldn't get the best Nadal anymore, right? Because it's
right. I assume that's where we draw the line. Yeah.
So yeah, I would have picked Alcaraz. I did pick Alcaraz before the start of the clay court season. I thought he was, to me, just based on past results, quality of play, the way his game shapes up, affinity for the surface. I mean, Sinner obviously has a lot of upside on the surface too, and he's played Rafa tough in that out of season Roland Garros, and he's got the chops for clay court tennis. But I mean, Alcaraz, I think for me, even though he won Wimbledon last year and he's won the U.S. Open, I do think clay is probably his best surface for me.
I agree. I think Alcaraz is lining up to have that run on Roland Garros. And for Sinner, I mean, even if he doesn't win, even if he doesn't play, Djokovic doesn't get to that final, he gets to that number one ranking. And a lot of significance, just getting the number one, what that means for you. Also, that Italian man getting the number one, some huge historical significance if Sinner does get to number one, which he has a great shot to.
Yeah, he does. I mean, for sure I think for sure he will get there. Back to Alcaraz quickly. I should say, I mean, the caveat is just, I love to watch him play, but I almost wish he wouldn't play like that because you could just see he's an accident waiting to happen. I just think, over a long season, his all action approach to the sport, the positions he puts his body in, he is going to get hurt. Not going to necessarily be debilitating all the time, but I think that's going to be his real challenge. And he's also playing with a bulked up body where he's really had to work hard to get his strength at an early age. I know they've thought very systematically about how to strengthen him and prepare him for the week to week grind. But so far, it's been a real challenge. And I just don't. Part of the modern game, sadly, is how you can avoid injury, and that's something that the big three, except for Rafa, one of the big four, for a certain amount of time until Murray had the problems with his hip, they managed it pretty well. And Carlos, so far, it's tough. So, yes, game-wise, what we're seeing, no doubt. I think that's his best surface, and I think he's got a few French Open victories in him, but the body's got to let him do it.
Certainly does. Wrapping things up with Chris Clarey here on Tennis Channel Inside In as we gear up for Roland Garros in a few days. A couple quick hitters before we wrap up. You were very, very, adamant, as I think a lot of us were, myself included, about the Dominic Thiem wildcard situation. He did win his first qualifying match. But as I watched that crowd, Chris, with a lot more fans than at a normal qualifying match, and I watched that support, I couldn't help but think, man, this would be good for business.
Yeah.
If he was in the mix.
Yeah. That thought crossed my mind as well, for sure. I mean, the French Open is trying to push the qualities. It is on site. They're selling tickets all week. And I think that's a great thing. I think it's great that the qualities get that kind of play. And you can't get a better headliner than Dominic Thiem, at this stage. And so I feel like, there could certainly have been around the round table there, at Roland Garros, that might have been part of the decision-making process for sure. It gives us a surefire mega story for the qualies, but I don't like it. I think Thiem, even though he didn't win the title, and though the French Open has really rarely given wild cards to non-French players, it's not very common that they do it. I think he passed the bar for me. I mean, just the way his career's gone at the end here, this sadness to it, and the two finals, the tough matches against the best players. I think he deserved a free pass. But as you say, he may end up getting more focus and more of what he's looking for, that communion with the crowd and opportunity to play in this venue, than if he would have gone out in straights in the first round against the seed. So, ultimately it may play out to be better than we thought. But just as basically a precedent to set or a precedent to respect, I'd like to have seen him get it.
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting and emotional time whenever he does play that last match. Someone that his body unfortunately just let him down. It's a sad thing to see. Diego Schwartzman also in the qualifying, playing his last French Open, and then there's a lot of players at Roland Garros for the very last time that aren't announcing it. So the sport moves on as some players get off the train. I wanted to ask you quickly, too, your thoughts, Chris, on the new ATP men's doubles trial format that they've been pushing in Madrid and in Rome. 16 spots for singles players, quicker, more fan engagement, a quicker, more abbreviated schedule in the second week. It's a hot button for controversy, but as somebody that has covered the game and been around it, what's your thought on the new ATP men's doubles format, giving singles players more entry at the expense of some of the doubles established players?
I mean, I feel like doubles has been a undervalued, sort of underappreciated thing on tour for my entire time covering the sport, really. I kind of came after the McEnroe Fleming periods, even people like the Woodies and the Bryan brothers, who were tremendous doubles teams, didn't really get that breakout exposure and appeal and placement during majors that they would have gotten in the older days of tennis, for sure. So I personally like that they're going to open it up to some more singles players. They've tried that already before. I don't think I like turning it into a speed show, a trick show. I think if you're going to let them play, let's do it the right way. Personally, the idea that there's not these long changeovers and kind of keep guys and keep the play moving, fine, but let's not try to accelerate the point. Let's let these doubles teams communicate within the play, say what they need to say, and play the point properly. But personally, the idea of, I think it would be good to see us get rid of maybe one changeover per set, and let's just walk across the net and keep playing. If you want to worry about the pace of the tennis and pace of game, let's do it for singles too. But It doesn't play into the idea of advertising and television breaks. But I think before you start messing with the actual rhythm of the sport as it's being played, let's take care of all the fat. And those long breaks certainly are fat. And I think the doubles guys like the chance they have to, whatever it takes to get them out in front and center a bit more. But for sure, if you're a good doubles player and your spot's being taken by a singles guy, that hurts. But unfortunately, I think as far as the way the sport's structured and the way the star system works, you need more of those guys to play both. And I think it happens more on the women's side than it does on the men's side. And I think whatever does that right and makes that happen probably is the right way to go. But you still want to preserve a little place for those great doubles players.
I agree with that last point. Bringing in some singles guys is going to increase the exposure, the popularity, the rising tide that'll lift all boats. I don't want to make it a speed show also, but I will say that it's nice because I'm on the side of, letting some fan movement too in here. I think is kind of a nice little thing, especially look at the 1-0 game in a set. That's where I completely draw the line. Like, let the fans in.
Oh yeah. Australia proved that it can be done. And I think that the players will adjust. The players will always adjust. But I mean, why not, maybe let's not necessarily have every time you have an odd game changeover, let's sit down for 90 seconds. Let's maybe speed things up a little bit and let's let the players move on. I mean, look back, talk to the older players from the classic era of tennis. There were no chairs on the side of the net, huh? They just stood up, took a swig and moved on, We needed some space for the game to promote its sponsors, but do we need as many as we have? And I think maybe the pace would improve from that.
I agree with that. I think it's fun. Chris Clarey, this has been a blast. The time just flew by as it always does. My last question is, I guess, what's next for you and what can we expect going into Roland Garros and beyond this summer?
Well, Mitch, thanks for asking. I'm going to be happily for me and for the new site, I'm going to be at the French Open. I'm leaving. We're doing this conversation in the U.S. I'm leaving for Paris tomorrow, and I'll be over there for the whole French Open, working some on the Rafa book, and also filing regularly for Tennis and Beyond on Substack. And then I'm going to be at Wimbledon as well, so I'll be there for the whole tournament, and I'll be at the Olympics. And that's sort of what I know about my summer. So not quite a little bit of a throwback for me. I'm not covering the news and day to day like I used to, but I'm going to be on site and hopefully doing some good think pieces and good game stories, Mitch.
Game stories.
Game
well,
stories
the
from those big matches.
The Federer addition to the Master, the final piece was great because that was quite the entry, and a lot happened since the publication of that book. So that was great. And the Paris Olympics. I mean, you had to get to this one. Tennis at the site of Roland Garros. I mean, that was a done deal when they announced where the site was. You were going to be there in 2024.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily thinking I was going to be back at Olympics. I've covered a bunch of them, but yeah, exactly. I mean, my wife's from there. I lived a few blocks behind Roland Garros when I started out my career internationally in Boulogne, the neighborhood just behind Roland Garros. So it's a place that's pretty near and dear for me. So I'm definitely excited about being there for that. And Paris, hopefully they'll be able to bring some energy back to the Olympics again. It's not in a great place. Obviously, Tokyo could have been fantastic, but because the pandemic, unfortunately, got hurt by that. And I think the Summer Olympics could really use a shot in the arm and a really transcendent edition. We'll see if Paris can produce that. I'm excited to watch.
Chris Clarey, you can find him on his Substack. You can also find him on various publications, as well as check out all of his outstanding books and pieces. Thanks for joining the podcast. Looking forward to chatting with you again soon.
Thanks, Mitch. You quizzed me well.